Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be taking a look at the 2024 presidential election in another edition of my Biden versus random Republican candidate series. We did Mike Pence 2 days ago, so today we'll be doing Doug Burgum, governor of North Dakota, not polling as well as Pence, and I think he's going to last not going to last as long in the race as Pence. Nevertheless, an interesting candidate and someone I think could be an electable option for Republicans. So we're going to start out by filling in our safe states for Joe Biden. These are the normal ones. I would say the West Coast, Colorado, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, D.C., Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Vermont, Maine, District 1, and Illinois, plus Hawaii. How could I forget Hawaii? And then for Doug Burgum, he obviously is from North Dakota, so I think he'd do very well, especially in these plains regions of the country. And I think he wins Kansas safe because, he's kind of from that broader area. And, he is, I think, better in the suburbs than Trump easily. And I also think he wins, a lot of the Trump voters over as well. Because, again, Trump, I think, seems to actually like Doug Burgum. He's called him a very high-quality guy. And he, I talked about Mike Pence in my previous video, how he could, potentially cost Republicans. And I think Burgum has less of a controversial dynamic within the Trump base than Mike Pence does. I also think that Burgum would do very well in Alaska. He wouldn't make it safe because it's, only a Trump plus 10 state and it's trending left. But I do think that he would do better there because he is, making this campaign, a lot of it's been energy, and I think that would be an issue he focuses on because it is very important to him, being from North Dakota. And so I would say as a result of that, he would probably do pretty well in Alaska. Just a local boost, I guess you could say, because of that issue. But it wouldn't be, he wouldn't lose a lot. No Republicans at risk of losing Alaska in 2024. So that should just stay as is. But now let's go over to our likely Democratic states. I think Biden wins the normal ones. I think he wins New Mexico and Virginia and New Hampshire as well as Maine. But you'll notice he's not winning Minnesota yet, which is, we'll talk about that in a second. And I think Nebraska, too, we're also not going to put there just yet. Now, Doug Burgum, I think he wins a couple states, likely margins. I think Iowa is one of them. It's pretty close to North Dakota. It's similar culturally. Obviously, it's a bit less conservative, but it is kind of a lot of farmers, a lot of agriculture, and North Dakota is not as much of a big farm state as Iowa is, but it's still pretty important there. And I think Burgum would tap into that. I think Ohio would be solid for Doug Burgum, but maybe a bit less so than Trump. I think he wins Maine too, kind of rural connections there, and I think he also does well in Florida, although. Maybe we would see Burgum perform significantly worse than Trump in Miami-Dade. I think he doesn't have that appeal, but he would make up for it by doing significantly better in Jacksonville, Tampa, and Orlando. So maybe Trump wins Florida by 6 against Biden. I think maybe Burgum wins it by maybe 4.5 to 5. So put it lead just to be careful, but wouldn't really be at risk of flipping. Now for Joe Biden's lean states, we're gonna get into these now. I think he wins Minnesota and Nebraska too to get started out there. And these are both traditionally likely Biden states if you watch my videos. But Burgum, obviously, we joke, a lot of people joke about western Minnesota, kind of this part being East Dakota. And that is obviously kind of true, actually, because culturally they're very similar. It votes, a pretty similar way. We also have seen Republicans doing better there as of late, as they've been doing better in the Dakotas. So Doug Burgum, I think a lot of farmers who are maybe traditionally Democratic voters or trending Republican anyways, I think they'd flock to someone like Doug Burgum. And I think in the suburbs, Burgum isn't necessarily, conservative enough to turn off these suburbs. I think he'd do better in Minneapolis. I think he comes within 4 points of winning Minnesota. Nebraska, too, kind of more of a Great Plains affinity thing where I think that we just see Burgum outrun just generically everywhere in this broader region of the country, and I think that applies to Nebraska, too. He probably loses it by 5, but we'll put it in the lean column. And yeah, so those are our lean Biden states. I think Burgum to get into his lean states. I think Texas is the first. It's borderline likely, but I want to put it in lean for the same reason as Florida. It's kind of a closer state here. Burgum would do very well in the suburbs. I think the rural areas, because he is from a rural state, I think he'd have that ability to connect with those voters, and I think he'd run on a very pro-rural. We're going to put more money in your pocket. We're going to make you independent. And, I think he can tout his record in North Dakota pretty well. He has some controversial policies like abortion and those things, which are obviously going to hurt him among some moderate pro-choice voters. But, North Dakota as a whole has some pretty good statistics. I looked it up prior to watching the debate last week. But, obviously I don't live in North Dakota because, 2 people live in North Dakota. I'm not one of them, but in all seriousness, statistically, North Dakota is actually doing well, and I think that he can say, look, as governor of the state, I have put more money in the pockets of rural voters and farmers, and I think I can do the same thing as president. So I think that, Texas Panhandle, which was obviously very strong for Trump would be the best candidate there no matter what. I think Burgum would minimize damage being done there, and I think he'd do better in the suburbs. So I think he wins Texas by 5. And yeah, so those are, I guess he only has one lean state here. But we are going to get into our lean Biden states. And I think the only one I'm going to give him from what it looks like is Georgia. Because I think Georgia, actually, no, we're not going to give him Georgia. You know what? Screw that. We're gonna make everything really close. So, to get into Burgum's lean states, I think he wins Nevada lean or tilt. I don't know why I'm saying I'm like going out of order here, but Biden talked about his. We talked about his lean states already. I'm like going crazy. We need to talk about his tilt states now. So Georgia, I'll give to him, and I'll give Burgum Nevada, and then we'll just talk about these two because I think these are the most obvious. I think Burgum doesn't really do that well in a state like Georgia. He's not like the thing with Doug Burgum is that he has unique appeal to both rural voters and suburban voters. But he doesn't have the ability. To really win over socially liberal rural or suburban voters. So, I invoked his governor or his record as governor. I cannot talk today, but I did invoke his record as governor earlier when talking about Texas. And I think if I'm going to do that one way, I'll do it the other way. I think that in a socially liberal area like the Atlanta suburbs, I think he'd have somewhat of an electoral penalty for his abortion restriction in North Dakota, which is among the most restrictive in the country. I think you'd also likely see that not really sit too well among voters potentially in other more liberal rural or more liberal metro areas. Obviously, Atlanta is growing and booming. It's getting more diverse. And again, the thing is, there aren't a ton of socially conservative voters in North Atlanta the way there are in the suburbs of Dallas, and I think that gives Burgum more of a downside. So I think he loses Georgia by maybe half a point. It'll be very close, though. Nevada, I think he wins probably by 1 or 2. That's because, again, it's a right-trending state. I think Trump can win it in 2024, and I think Burgum is broadly better. I think unlike someone like Mike Pence, who I think would really just underperform in the suburbs, Burgum has that appeal. As I've been saying, he has that ability in him to win over these voters. I think that he'll get fine turnout and he'll win Nevada by, maybe 10 to 15,000 votes, which is close, but, decent margin for a Republican in Nevada. So those are our, I'd say, more obvious states. I think Doug Burgum would also probably win Pennsylvania, and I think we're going to give him Wisconsin too, so he's already getting very close. And I say that because, look, he is a very unique candidate. And if he's campaigning on energy and, fracking, keeping, money in the pockets of rural and working class voters, and he can tout his record as governor, I think that sits well in Pennsylvania. I also think he's not offensive enough. Like, obviously, he wouldn't do well in the Philly suburbs. I don't think he's a great candidate for that. But I think he's not offensive enough to drop to the extent that Trump or even maybe DeSantis would. And so, if he's staying afloat in Chester, Montgomery, Delaware County, if he's doing all right in Allegheny County, which is where Pittsburgh is, and he's just really, really turning up his strength with rural voters in, oil areas of the state, he can win. Very narrow, but, he can get it done. Wisconsin, this is a state that I was really, going back and forth on when I outlined this video. But I will say this. Doug Burgum has that rural appeal. As I've said, I sound like a broken record, but I think he can get it done. I think that when you look at northern Wisconsin, that's an area where Republicans can gain ground. And I think Trump would obviously gain ground there because it is kind of a Trumpy area. But Doug Burgum, again, someone who I don't think Trump really hates as much as he hates someone like Mike Pence, I think he can do that, and I think he would, win Wisconsin just because he does better than Trump in WOW and almost matches him in the rural areas, just in terms of both turnout and in terms of margin. So, give him Wisconsin. Now, these 3 states I think are really close. I will give Burgum North Carolina, so he's going to win the presidency here, but I want to give Biden Michigan because I really don't think he'd lose it, and I think Arizona is the, closest state here. I am going to say maybe we'll give it to Doug Burgum, but, very, very, very close. So here's what I will say. I think in North Carolina, Burgum probably does, he probably wins it by maybe like 2 or 3, but we're going to keep it until to be cautious, but it's pretty obvious. Trump won it. I don't see why Burgum would lose it. Then to go over to Arizona here, this state is obviously, like I said in my previous video, it's very elastic. It is very, just goes back and forth. So Democrats won the Senate race last year by 5. They won the governorship by half a point. They won the Secretary of State race by 5. And then they lost the Treasury race by 11. So it's a very split tickety state. There's a lot of people who will vote for a Democrat for one race, but then a Republican for another race. I think that benefits someone like Burgum, who can maybe do better in the rural areas in a way Mike Pence can, but can also hold his ground in the suburbs. So maybe he does worse than Pence in the suburbs, but better in the rural areas. And again, I don't know where that would fall exactly because we don't know how well Pence would do in a real life scenario. But here's what I'll say. I think Arizona, because it's so lasting, because Biden's just, old, unpopular, and really, I think, his own worst enemy at this point, just from an electability standpoint. I think that could cost him a state like Arizona kind of as a surprise. So, we'll give that to Doug Burgum, but we are being generous here. I could easily give it to Joe Biden. So it really doesn't, to me, the state doesn't really matter because Burgum's already winning and I'm already confident about the other states. So, we can go back and forth, but I think Biden would probably narrowly lose to Doug Burgum. Michigan, though, I think he'd hold on to it, and that's mostly because Burgum does, I think Burgum, again, would appeal really well to rural voters, but I don't think that's enough to make up the gap statewide. So maybe Burgum can do a point or so better in Michigan just from rural strength and from not having Trumpian numbers in the suburbs, but is it enough to win a state like Michigan, which is getting increasingly blue? I don't think so. I think Biden still holds on to it by probably 1 or 2%. So that's the Biden versus Burgum electoral map. And you'll notice that this is an interesting observation. It's depolarized. States that are traditionally not as not very competitive or closer, like Minnesota, Nebraska's 2nd district, and then we have a lot of tilt states. Like in a Trump versus Biden match, we'd only have 2 or 3 tilt states, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tilt states here in this Burgum versus Biden matchup. So I think that'd be kind of interesting to watch. But that would be my current prediction. We don't have any Biden versus Burgum polling, so don't come at me too hard. But just based off of vibes and just some preliminary guesses, I think this is what we'd see. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Let me know what you want to see after, just for some more candidates after I do Chris Christie, who's coming next. So if you want to see anyone else, just let me know, and I'll see you all in the next one.